Hi, my name is Claire Bidwell Smith, and I'm the author of a memoir called The Rules of Inheritance. And I'm here in the studios at Mahalo answering some questions on Reddit and from my blog that readers posted about the book and my writing process. This first question is from Lisa. She writes, I sense that your memoir is not just a collection of your memories, but also a manifesto, so to speak, of your philosophies about death, grief, and the like. Was it hard to create a story arc that didn't become too prescriptive? It's a really good question. I've read a lot of memoirs, and they all have a certain formula that works for them, and I think that was the hardest part of figuring out how to write this book was, how to tell the story. And originally when I started working on this version of it, yes, there were other versions, I was going to write a book that was more about grief, and so I started taking on my own ideas about the 5 stages of grief, and then it became more a memoir. So the book as it stands now is divided into the 5 stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages. And each stage is a section in the book that has 3 chapters that pertain to that stage. So each chapter is a certain section of my life that pertains to, say, denial or anger or depression. So in that way it is kind of a manifesto of my beliefs about grief, because I was trying really hard to just show a personal aspect of the 5 stages. The very first chapter begins with my mother's death, and I'm in denial about that. And then the next chapter skips to me at age 14 when both my parents get cancer, and we're all in denial about that. Then the third chapter in that section, my father's getting sick again. So it's just a very personal way to look at those stages, which I think worked really well in the book. And so the whole story is told non-linearly, and you get to know my story and my life in all these different ways, while at the same time really getting an understanding of the 5 stages of grief. So the next question is from Carolyn. I'm curious about the process of writing a memoir. It seems there would be some memories that would be difficult to relive and other details that may have been forgotten. Was it difficult to write or even recall the events that unfolded as you wrote your book, or did you call on other sources to help you with that? That's a really good question, and I think one that a lot of memoirists struggle with is the idea of memory. What's real, what isn't, how authentic is a memory? And in some cases, memories are so easy. They're so real, they're so profound. There's ones that never ever leave you. And then there's ones that are kind of hazier, or you think maybe you've changed them in your head a little bit. And I think that's okay too. I think memories evolve with time. And I think that in some of those cases, I would even write that. I would say, the way I remember this now is that blah, blah, blah happened. And I think that that's an interesting aspect of memory and an aspect of memoir writing that should be recognized a lot. There were definitely memories that were hard to recall. I would be sitting in coffee shops sometimes and writing and think, okay, I need to leave now so I can go home and cry. And that was okay too, or I would just be home and I would cry. And it was therapeutic to work through some of those memories. This next question is from Chloe. Was writing this book therapeutic for you in dealing with your own struggles? What made you decide to put your experiences into a book form? And that touches on the last question from Carolyn too, just about memories and about reliving them and sitting with them. And I think that it was absolutely therapeutic to write this. In some ways, it was one of the final ways for me to really move through my grief and move through the experience of losing my parents. It was definitely hard sometimes, and just challenging to go through it again. I think it brought up a lot, and I'm now a mother and a wife, and so there would be times during my day-to-day life that I was kind of at the same time immersed in the memories of what I was working on, and that made things a little challenging, but also just really rewarding in the long run. And putting it in book form, I don't know, I've just always been a writer, and I don't feel like I really had a choice. I was just always going to write about this. I like to think in some ways that I was just born nostalgic. I just like to think about the past and kind of think about what it looks like from here and what it will look like again in 10 years. I think I could write this whole book over again in 10 years and then another 20 years, and it would be different every time. So there's 2 questions here from Wendy and from Joe that are pretty similar. Wendy says, seeing as your book is a memoir, is there anyone you wrote about in the book who you felt the need to contact regarding content prior to publishing? And Joe says, how do you think your friends and family will react to some of the deeply personal elements of the book? Did you keep their reactions in mind when you were writing, editing it? And again, this is a huge thing with memoir. You're writing about other people's lives, not just your own. And it's something that I think writers struggle to be both authentic about what they're writing and then also respectful to the other people in their lives. And it was definitely something that I thought about throughout. Initially, I wrote the book just not caring, not knowing if it was going to be published, not caring if it was ever published, just writing what I needed to write about all the people. And later I went back and changed things, maybe took out something that I didn't need to say about someone that wasn't very nice or could be hurtful to them. I changed a few names. I wrote to everybody in the book to ask if somehow I still know everybody I've ever met in my life, and maybe thanks to social media. And I wrote to everybody and asked if I could use their name. And most people were very gracious about it and said yes, even not knowing what I had written about them. Ex-boyfriends, I was impressed. You know, I don't know if I would do the same. Some ex-boyfriend contacted me and said he had a memoir coming out. Anyway, a lot of them said yes, and then there were only a couple people whose names I changed. And some of that was just to protect them and their lives and things that they had been through, and just to keep some of their privacy. I would change maybe only their name and like their hair color, and so everything else about them in the story is true. And then the other part of the question is, how will some people in my life react to it? And I'm nervous. I am a little nervous. I'm nervous about what my in-laws will think. I don't think they know everything about my life. A lot of my friends do. I'm not a very private person. I have a blog that I've had for years. I mean, I'm pretty public. I have no secrets really. But then again, there are always people in your life who have certain ideas of you and they want to keep you in a certain box. And my box is now wide open and about to be on bookshelves. So it'll be interesting. I just hope that I've tried really hard to be careful and make sure I haven't hurt anybody or surprised anybody too much. And so hopefully it will be a good experience for everyone involved. Another question was, how and when did my writing interest originate? And I have just been a writer for as long as I can remember. My mom was an artist, and she was always trying to get me to take art classes and painting and drawing, and all I ever wanted to do was write. I would take my paintbrush and write words instead. My mom was frustrated, but it was what I loved, and so she finally gave into that. And I have always been a voracious reader, even since I was a kid. And my first stories were about ladybugs getting married. I still remember them. I still have them. I wrote really silly stories in middle school about running away to like Laguna Beach or something really silly, and then I was a poet all through high school, and I wrote these really angsty poems that are really hard to revisit now, but they taught me so much about language, and they taught me a lot about just the power of one word, the power of 3 words, how much you can pack into that. So poetry, although I don't write it anymore and rarely read it, it still has a big place in my heart in terms of writing. And then I got a bachelor's degree in creative writing at the New School in Manhattan, and I had some amazing teachers. And from there, I started writing a lot of freelance work, food writing, travel writing, and was always working my own personal writing too, but always memoir. It was always going to be memoir writing, and I'm still continuing on with that even after this book. For me, writing feels like something I don't have a choice about. It is like breathing to me. I have to write every day, all the time, sometimes just, for 5 minutes. I carry notebooks sometimes I just jot things down like in an email draft. I've just got little bits of writing everywhere, and I have to, I need it. It's a release for me. It's just part of who I am. And I think that anyone can be a writer. I think some people don't have a choice in it. I think you can be both of those things. I think you can not have a choice and make yourself do it and learn how to do it. And I think I've done it all those ways. I've had amazing teachers, and I've really pursued it in addition to not really having a choice. It's been a great experience. I'm really happy that I'm a writer. So a question I get a lot is, how do I find time to write with such a young child, and how do I work on something so intensely emotional with being a mother? And it's really difficult. I have to carve out time here and there. I have to work around her schedule. A lot of times I don't get to do what I want to be doing. I'm at the playground, or I'm cleaning up pudding off the floor. It's just something ghastly, and all I want to be doing is writing because I just had a great idea, or I'm feeling really inspired, and it's frustrating. But I'm also really happy to be a mom. And I've found that becoming a mother has just had a profound effect on me in terms of making my life really meaningful. my husband and I both wrote books, our first books, within the first year of her life. I think we were both so inspired and so just caught up in life and love and just feeling so much. And we also felt, when she was born, I felt very much that my life had to be worth it somehow. It's hard to explain, but I just wanted to make more of an impact. I wanted to carve more of a road that she could come down, that we could just provide a space and a path for her. And that meant providing a space and a path for me, and being a role model, and being the best person I could be, so I could be a good mom. So in that way, it's had a really big effect on my writing, and just making me really want to work as hard as I can and be the best that I can be as a writer. And it's paid off. I've been more successful than I've ever been in the last 2 years. While it's been so hard and such a struggle, and just late nights and being exhausted, and it's at the same time just been amazing and really worked. Before she was born, I would sit around all day and had nothing to do, and I'd be like, oh, I need to write, I've got hours, and I just wouldn't. I would like go for walks or sleep too late or whatever, and life didn't really seem to matter. And now I'm just like, okay, I've got 20 minutes, and I'll pound out something really awesome. So in that way, it's been great to be a mom and a writer. Erica writes, is it easy for you to be open in your writing? Have you always been comfortable sharing personal things, or is this something you had to develop? It's both. I am just an open person. I don't know why, and I don't know how, and I have no secrets. There's nothing I'm afraid to talk about or to tell somebody. And the other aspect of that is I did make an effort in this book to be incredibly honest. I've had a blog for years, and I write in it almost every day, and there's still a certain amount that I don't write there. There's certain things that I don't write about, certain personal feelings or relationships or fears, just because it's, it doesn't need to be that public. I've got old college roommates and my mother-in-law reading it, and so there's a certain level of honesty there. But then with this book, I knew that to make it really a good book and to make it worth really writing about the story, I had to go all the way. And also, in order, I think, to write about grief, I had to be very honest. I had to be very honest about the ugly parts, the ugly things that happened, the ways I felt about my mother being sick or my father dying, how it was a relief sometimes to know that the end was near with one of them, or how hard it was to see my mother sick and how she didn't look like my mom. And there were some things that were difficult to write about, and they're difficult to read when I look back on them now, but I think that they are some of the things that make the book great and that make it authentic and make me a real person for writing them. So in that regard, being open is both comes naturally and is something I've tried really hard to do with this book. So Wendy writes, what books or authors have influenced your writing the most? And this is a good question. I think Wendy also asks after this question, what is the biggest advice you can give to other writers? And I think these questions actually go hand in hand, because the biggest advice I can give is to read all the time, read everything, read everybody, and also to write all the time. That's my biggest advice for writers: read and write. And in that aspect, I've read a lot of poetry. I mentioned this earlier. Poetry's had a big effect on my writing. I started reading poems in 7th, 8th grade. I have an older cousin who was a poetry major, and I showed her one of my terrible early poems when I was like in 7th grade. And at the top of my piece of paper, and I still have this notebook, she wrote down 2 names. She wrote down Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath. And I went home, and I was 7th grade, and I said, Mom, I want these books, I want these writers. And so my mom took me to the bookstore, and she got me a little slim volume of each of them. And I took them home, and I just devoured them. I'd never read anything like that. I'd been reading Babysitter's Club books and, Beverly Cleary, and here I was suddenly reading Anne Sexton, and the words that these 2 women had put on the page just changed my life. And I kept reading, and I read more poets and more novelists and then memoirs. And memoirs blew my mind. I had no idea you could write about your own life. Up until then, I'd only read fiction and novels and stories, and I was suddenly reading these books by women like Mary Carr and Dorothy Allison, who were writing about these really sad lives that they'd lived growing up, but they made them so beautiful and so accessible, and just really, really blew my mind. And I started to do the same, and I started to look at my life and my memories and think, how can I encapsulate this in one story that someone else can read and take away with them? So this next set of questions is about grief. Rachel asks, was there a defining moment when you realized you could use your grief to help others, or was it more of a process over time? And I think it was a process over time. I was definitely immersed in my own grief for too long, or for a long period of time, too long before I could realize I could help other people. And it was only when I began to come out of it that I found myself able to sit on the other side of grief and talk to people who were grieving and relate to where they were sitting in that moment. Remembering the first year of losing somebody, all the first you go through, the first holidays and the first anniversaries and the first time you just, have a summer without someone that you're missing. All those things I had done many times, and so to be able to sit with somebody and kind of talk to them about how to move through that, or that it's possible that there will be a year in which you've already done these things, and maybe that person isn't the first thing you think about in the morning, even though you never stop missing them or loving them. So I think that there was never one defining moment. Becoming a therapist was a powerful experience for me, and it's still something that I'm very humbled by. I feel very privileged to sit with other people and listen to their stories and work with them on whatever it is they're going through. It's an evolving process all the time, learning about myself, learning about other people. I learn so much from the people I talk to and the stories I hear, and I'm always struck by how much love there is in grief. I always kind of see it as like those negative image paintings where you're supposed to look at the black part and then you see a whole new image, and I feel like when someone comes into me with this profound amount of grief, I end up just seeing all the love that grief is balanced by. Like, they wouldn't be grieving so much if they didn't love someone so much. So yeah, it's a process that I think will continue to keep evolving for the rest of my life. I think I'll keep learning about grief and keep learning about other people and myself and how it all works. Hunter asks, how long would you say is enough time to grieve? And that's a loaded question. There's definitely no particular time. There's no time frame. Everybody is different. Some people, and it depends on the loss too. It's a really tricky question, but I think the main answer is that there is no right answer. You have to figure it out for yourself. You may think that you've finished grieving, and maybe I've even finished grieving at some points, and then it's come back. Becoming a wife and a mother brought up a lot of old loss for me. It made me miss my parents all over again in a different way, even though I was no longer actively grieving or I wasn't depressed. At the time, it still brought up old wounds and sadness for me. I've had clients who have come to me 10 years after the loss of someone, and they just never really grieved. I had a guy who lost his wife, and he didn't have time to grieve. He had a young daughter, and so he just moved on, and he kept working, and he was raising his daughter, and 10 years later he found that he was finally in a place where he could deal with his grief, and it was all right there waiting for him, So there's no right answer to that. Grief takes as long as you need it to, and I do think that the more you are able to sit with it and sit through it, the easier you'll get through it. If you can put it away like this guy did, and it will still be there in 10 years, in a sense. So I think that the more you can just kind of face it, the only way out is through, that old phrase, So yeah, there's no right way to do it. There's no right time frame. Rachel asks, what has been the most powerful or moving experience while working as a bereavement counselor for hospice? I worked as a bereavement counselor for hospice in Chicago for 4 years, and it was a really intense experience. A lot of people, when I told them what I would do, they would just say, oh my God, that sounds awful. How can you do that? That sounds so sad. And the thing about it, it wasn't sad. It wasn't sad at all. It was, I always felt very privileged to be doing what I did, to walk into someone's home and help this family have the most peaceful process of losing someone that they could was a really beautiful thing. A lot of people don't get that opportunity. They lose someone and they don't get the chance to say goodbye, or they don't get the chance to say their piece. And so as a hospice team, we worked to not only make the patient comfortable, but to help the family come to terms with what was happening. And when we were able to really be there and help that happen, it was the best thing in the world. And I had so many moments during my time with hospice that are almost indescribable. You know, just sitting with people who were dying who I'd never met before, and they weren't even awake. I remember sitting in this nursing home one afternoon, and this son couldn't be there for his mom on time, and he just wanted someone, anybody, to sit there until he could get there. And so I went, and this woman was in her 80s, and she was unconscious, and she was in a bed, and I didn't know anything about her, and I just sat down and I held her hand, and I watched her breathe, and it was kind of late afternoon, and the room was kind of dimly lit, and I just kind of had one of those moments where you just realize that we're all just people, you know, all the things that make us who we are, they don't always matter, you know. Sometimes we're just two people sitting in a room holding hands, and that's all it needs to be. So moments like that were the most profound for me in hospice. So these next three questions kind of go together. They're from Rachel, AJ, and Reese. And Rachel asks, how did the loss of your parents affect your parenting style? AJ says, did having a child help you get over the grief of losing your own parents? And Reese wants to know, who are your mothering mentors? And having lost your parents so young, who do you go to for support? And yeah, having a child has had a big impact on my loss of parents. It's been twofold. It's made me miss them more than I have in years, miss my mom and dad so much. I wish I could share my daughter with them. I wish they could see her. I wish she could meet them. That's so hard for me. I wish so much that she knew who they were. She has one set of grandma and grandpa that's all she knows is grandma and grandpa, my husband's parents. But at the same time, I also feel like I've had these lost years given back. You know, all the things that happen before you really remember, the ages from 0 to 4 or 5, when you start really remembering things, I'm seeing those with my daughter and realizing all this time that my parents had with me that I didn't know about, all just the sweet moments, the snuggling, the holding a kid at 3 in the morning when they're crying. And I feel like I'm getting to relive this with my own parents, and how appreciative I am of what they did and the time they spent with me. So that's been really magical, and I feel like that's going to continue to go on and on throughout my entire relationship with my daughter. And my struggle, I think, is just to create some kind of, make them alive for her, whether pictures or stories or just kind of talking about them a lot. I want them to exist for her. I want them to exist in her world, and that will continue to be a struggle, but one that I'm up for. I want her to know them. And so in that way, it didn't help me necessarily get over the grief, but it changed my grief a lot. And has it affected my parenting style? I think that's a good question. Yeah, I think that in a larger sense, all the loss I've experienced in my life has just affected me as a person in a big way of, I don't take it much for granted. I'm always appreciative of time I have with people, obviously with my daughter, my husband, but also just with friends or moments alone, you know. So I think in terms of my parenting style, it's made me a little lax. I never really get mad about silly things, spills, or if we're late, or you know, if something didn't go as planned, because I don't really care. I'm just glad that we're all here and that we have this time together. So I'm sure she'll get away with a lot, but I think that will make life a little fun too. As for my mentors, my mothering mentors, and who I go to for support, I have family members that are great, aunts and uncles. My in-laws have been amazing grandparents and role models for being parents. And my friends are great. They are my mothering mentors, my girlfriends, and I feel like collectively the amount of girlfriends I have all kind of make up my fabulous mother. They all have these aspects of her that I miss and that I found. And so I just have some wonderful people in my life, and I'm really grateful for it. And I'm really amazed by all the support I do have in terms of being a parent without parents. So these next set of questions are more about the publishing process. Wendy writes, what were the challenges of bringing your book to life? And oh my God, there were some challenges. Writing a book, one, is challenging, and that's a tough thing. You have to write the book. And then if you want to actually publish it, you've got a whole new slew of challenges. Finding an agent, finding a publisher. It takes a lot of work and a lot of time, a lot of rejections. I almost gave up so many times. I've actually written a couple of versions of this book. I wrote a version of this book a few years ago that I couldn't find a home for and wasn't a good version of the book, and I'm glad that I didn't find a home for it at the time. And with this one, I think I queried about 25 agents. I got rejected by a lot of them. And then there were a few that were interested. I found one wonderful agent who I work with now named Wendy Sherman, and she immediately saw the book for what I meant it to be and was completely confident that she could sell it, and sold it in 3 weeks to Penguin. And so, you know, there were so many times I could have given up, and almost did, and I did give up several times. and then I would drag myself back to it somehow. I just could not let this book go. And I'm glad, you know, now it's coming out in hardcover, and it's been my dreams come true so far. But I think the biggest challenges are just going through that rejection process that every writer goes through, and just really having to do the work yourself. You have to get out there, you have to research agents and research publishers and research the market. I spent a lot of time following other writers' careers. If there was a new writer that came out with a memoir, I was like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. I want to be that young 30-year-old memoirist. So what has she done? What's her career been like? What's her writing path been? Was she a freelancer? Did she come out of nowhere? Does she have an MFA? You know, do I need to do these things? And so I really kind of studied the market a lot, and it paid off. You know, I knew what I was talking about when I got into it. I had a platform as a writer. I'd built myself up enough to where I could present, you know, here's how I will promote this book, here's how I will, you know, network with it. And Penguin was happy about that and excited, and I could not be more thrilled to be with a publishing company like Penguin. So Will asks, what steps have you taken to promote your own work? And that's a really big question these days. The publishing industry is changing hourly right now with e-publishing and with being able to publish things on your own, and hardcover books kind of filtering out almost, and everything is changing, and every publisher that you go to wants to know, what can you do to promote this book? What platform do you have? Because they have less money than ever to work with. They have less money than ever to advertise with, to, you know, do publicity for. So you have to come in already having an idea of what you can do and what you can bring to the table. And so that was something I had researched and knew that I had to do, and had my blog for a long time. I have been freelancing for a long time. I have a lot of magazine contacts. I have a lot of writer friends. Talk to all of them. I'm willing to just kind of talk about my book, to go out there, to meet people, to make friends. I'm just kind of a social person anyway, so I like to hang out with other writers and find out what's going on. And so when my book proposal went to Penguin, I had a whole section in there about what I would do, who I would be in touch with to promote my book. Twitter, Facebook, all those things are necessary evils. You know, they want to know how many Twitter followers you have and what your Facebook profile is like, and all these silly things that these days are very important. And so I think if you were to go into it as a writer blindly and not have any of that, you would have some work to do, and they might be a little more skeptical about taking you on. So I think that all writers need to kind of think about their platform, as painful as it can be. It's just part of the process. Litsa has a good question. What do you think of NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month, and other recent constructs that encourage a group approach to novel writing? Do you think they empower or infantilize writers? I think both. I think anything that encourages people to write is great. Like, absolutely. It's funny now that I have a book coming out, people say, oh, I want to write a book. And then you're just like, oh, it's a little harder than, like, I want to write a book. But at the same time, I also am like, do it, right? Write your book. Everyone should write their book. And I think that something like National Novel Writing Month is great because it gives you a setting and support to sit down and really work on it. And maybe you really do have it in you, and it's there, and all you needed was some encouragement from people and a kind of structure to go with every month. And so I think in that regard, it's awesome. And then, yes, it can be a little, I don't know, I guess I think some writers feel like it takes away from all the work that they do and who they are inherently as writers. But back to it, ultimately I think it's a really good thing. I think anyone who's encouraged to write should be, and who wants to write, I think more power to you. Jen's asked, what would you have done differently now that you've been published? And the answer is actually nothing. I feel like I worked really, really hard, and like I said, I gave up so many times, I was rejected so many times, and I kept going. And I think now, on all the times that I could have really stopped, and I could have been like, okay, that was the umpteenth agent who just said that this book is never going to work and never going to sell. And there were a lot of times when I could have listened to that and I didn't. And so there's not really anything that I would change. I think I ended up in the best place possible for this book, and I'm really, really grateful for it. Hi, my name is Claire Bidwell Smith, and I wrote a memoir called The Rules of Inheritance. It will be available February 2nd, 2012 on Amazon, on e-readers and bookstores everywhere in hardcover. It's available right now for pre-order on Amazon, and you can find more information on my blog, www.clairebidwellsmith.com. Thanks.